Welcome to Esoterica, the podcast, the live stream. It's our Sunday night live show. I'm Chris Schultz,
I'm Aaron Christian.
and we are joined tonight by our very special guest, the Bitchy Historian.
Hi, guys. Thank you so much for having me here tonight.
Thank you for coming on. We're pretty
thank
excited.
you so much.
No problem.
So, for those that are tuning in, this is a live stream. You can pop in with any questions or comments. We'll keep an eye on that. So join the conversation. So one of the reasons we asked Ms. Bitchy to be here is in this turbulent time that we're all living through, in this poorly written, whatever you want to call it, that is America. The most loud voices are the stupid voices. There's a lot of people screaming and a lot of dumb stuff being said. And we're trying to, part of our job at Esoterica is to shine a light on the obscure, and apparently intelligent conversation has become obscure. So we're hoping to shine a light on some of what we're going through a more historical context. Sorry. So we asked an actual historian to come on and help clarify things for us. So for our small audience compared to your large followers, Angela, you want to tell us a little bit about you?
Okay. So I started the Bitchy Historian in January of 2017 after the inauguration of President Trump, because I had a lot of people on my Facebook page who were just screeching at me about having to maintain my composure and having to act more professional, or basically just like trying to, like, I don't want to say stifle free speech, but they were being relatively rude to me. I'm like, you know what, sure, I'll take my rantings and I'll take all those awful memes that you keep sharing, that I keep fact checking, and I will place them on this page. And then all of you guys can just come here, or I will share it from this page. And this can be my new secret identity. And if you want to get mad over here. I did not expect it to go as viral as it has gone within the last couple of years. I want to say definitely within the last 12 to 18 months, my followers and likes on the page just absolutely exploded. I went from having just a couple thousand to I think I'm closing in on 19,000 right now. So I didn't actually intend for it to go this crazy, but I'm definitely running with it. You know, I had to pick up an extra staff member. That's Mini Bitchy. And it hasn't always been easy because we are extremely outspoken. And I do like to ask those questions and turn those knives. So yes, those vocal idiots, so to speak, do come on, but they tend to not last. I don't censor them. You know, the internet's very good at eating their own. And so was she. So I don't really delete or censor anybody unless they come out guns blazing in absolute hate speech, which I have absolutely zero tolerance for at all times. And I think we're seeing a lot of that right now too. I think there's this incredible gap between what people assume should be considered free speech and hate speech, which I like to refer to as freedom of screech. I'll bring it up occasionally on my page. And so what I've been kind of trying to do in order to like push back on this is trying to like push real sources on people, not Wikipedia, not, you know, memes. It's bad enough that we're speaking in pictograph again, let's be real, but trying to like push some information out there, but I don't do it in a subtle coddling way. And someone actually freaked out about me a couple weeks ago on that, and I'll have to talk about that in a little bit. But you know, for those that follow me, you know that I pull no punches. I don't really care what side of the political aisle that you're on. If you're wrong, you're wrong, and I'm going to call you out on it. And if you don't like it, tough rocks.
Mm-hmm. I think that's one of the things I appreciate about you is, you know, you're right, and you're not going to let people get away with being wrong. And we need more of that. There seems to be, I used to be optimistic and have faith in humanity. And it seems like Facebook, somebody put something on Facebook, they could say the sky's purple and people just forward that shit and believe it without thinking twice.
Yeah, I find it very confusing that in the age of information, so to speak, where you can literally, where I can be on my computer right now, I can throw a Boolean search into Google and I can find everything that I need within like 5 minutes, where we have almost every bit of knowledge accessible. I mean, I can get into the Vatican archives for free on the internet. All you got to do is put it on the website. We have all this information, and yet people are communicating once again by memes, by images. And I find this seriously upsetting because now, we had that commercial a few years ago now with the crazy girl was like, yeah, they can't put it on the internet if it isn't true. And we laughed at it then, but now I'm not laughing so much. I'm like, no, wait, people really do think a lot of this stuff is like gospel. And one of the things that I've been trying to work on right now is that there's a plague diary written by a man called Samuel Pepys. And he really wrote this diary back in the 17th century during the Great Plague in London in like 1664, 1665. Someone started a satire Twitter account. And for those of us who know it's satire and can catch the satire on there, it's great. But when he brings up things like the president of America, there was no president of America in the 17th century. And people are sharing this like, oh, those doomed to, repeat history. And I'm like, wait, this isn't real. Well, how do you know it isn't real? I'm like, first of all, they would never have referred to the plague as the pox. The pox is syphilis. So words matter. And when I point this out, either people like, oh, you got me kind of thing, that's kind of funny, or they get really offended. And watching people get up in arms when you correct them is just hilarious. And if you can't tell I'm very Italian, I'm going to be speaking with my hands all night. So if they're going to start getting higher and higher and we start pulling my hair, it'll be great.
Yeah. People and their lack of facts. And Punchin Nazis.
Punchin Nazis. There's nothing more American than punching Nazis. Since, I mean, look at your background. You have Captain America punching Hitler, and what a lot of people don't realize is that both Jack Kirby and Stan Lee were World War II vets, and Jack Kirby was boots on the ground infantry. He punched real Nazis, and he was not going to hesitate to punching, for punching real Nazis again. Stan Lee was actually Signal Corps. So while he didn't see as much action, he was absolutely over there as well. So Marvel Comics has a deep rooted tradition of Nazi punching, so to speak, but they've also always been at the forefront of social justice, coming through the civil rights movement, of course, with the inclusion of Black Panther and X-Men.
Mm-hmm. Funny books are more progressive than the rest of society. Who would have thunk, right?
They always have been. It's always been a thing. I mean, you had Superman during the Golden Age consistently preaching, in America we respect and honor, like, people of different, creeds and colors and stuff like that. And then here we are 75 years later, and it's like more horrible than ever, and we're more divided than ever. But I mean, speaking as someone who is only a third generation American, my great grandfather came over in the 1900s and from Italy, and he faced a great deal of discrimination, even as someone who fought for the United States in World War I and then put in his draft card again for World War II. And they went to serious great lengths to prove, like, hey, we want to be here. And again, they were treated absolutely poorly. So it's like some of us like to say, history doesn't necessarily repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And growing up hearing these stories, regarding my family having to deal with issues, especially the Irish and the Scottish side of the family during the 1800s, and then the Italian family during the 1920s and 30s, it was just, I have a very difficult time even trying to relate to anybody who has these bigoted views toward immigrants. As someone who grew up always aware of my immigrant origin, it's just mind-boggling to me. But
oops,
Chris getting alerts over there.
Just getting alerts.
Yeah, it's what makes I go insane thinking about this, that we're really not that far off from when like actual Nazis were a thing. This country watched that come to fruition, and here we are again. So I'll ask you this, talking about POTUS. A lot of people on the left are quick to say, you know, he's a fascist, he's a little mini Hitler, where I always tend to think the man himself is, I don't want to give him that much credit. I think a lot of what he says is just pure ignorance, and then he's got an echo chamber around him that backs it up. Right, wrong, somewhere in the middle.
So, I don't want to say that there aren't red flags of fascism. There's a lot of things that are going on that are very disturbing. And much like Hitler, though, and this feels very Godwin's law. This whole situation feels very Godwin's law. If you're familiar with that term, it's that pretty much any argument on the internet will come around to Nazi Germany and Hitler. Of course, this came out much earlier in the 2000s, and now that we're here in this timeline, it's just totally bizarre. But I want to say overall, Hitler was a bit more charismatic. He had more knowledge. He was also in a position to where the field of anthropology was strikingly new. It was only 20, 30 years old, and he could use that. He weaponized that, and he had the staff to help him weaponize that. We do have staff members in the current administration that I find to be shady as fuck, and I don't trust them. Stephen Miller, one of them. He definitely comes across as somebody who has read his Joseph Goebbels, and there's way too many little things going on. Like, just this last week with the scheduling of the speech in Tulsa on Juneteenth, which was changed by a whole day, but Trump did change it. And I don't know if that was just out of pressure or ignorance. It's hard to say. And then, of course, the scheduling of, moving the RNC to Jacksonville, where I currently live, at least partially. So Trump's going to be giving his acceptance speech, beer burp, on Axe Handle Saturday, which was a devastating day here in Jacksonville during the civil rights movement, where peaceful protesters, Black protesters having a lunch counter sit-in were attacked by members of the KKK, yielding baseball bats and axe handles, and they got beaten to death. It's almost too good to be a coincidence between the two of them. And I understand that, the conventions are always in this particular time of the year, but moving it specifically to Jacksonville, where, it is the largest city by land area in Florida, but we really don't have the infrastructure for a very large convention, especially right now during the pandemic. In my opinion, North Carolina did the right thing. You cannot have all of these people around, but our governor is so far up Trump's ass that he found, the attorney general. And little things like that. I'm just like, I'm evacuating that week, by the way. I'm just not even going to stick around. I don't even want to deal with it. I mean, we live way out in the beaches anyway, so I'm not that close to downtown, but I'd rather just not be anywhere near the city for that, just in case. And of course, with my husband being active duty, it does tend to complicate things a little bit more as well. So it might be one of those things where I get in the car and I like run to Miami for the week or over to Tampa to see my family, and he has to stay here and work. I'll just be like, see ya. Good luck. But and obviously I can't discuss his political opinions at all, and that's fine. But the rolling back of like transgender protections this week was also kind of incredibly alarming, especially during Pride Month. And I as a whole, these last few years have just been incredibly bizarre, if not upside down. Like, we went from an Obama presidency, and was he the best? No, of course not. It's very difficult to place any president or any leader of any country as like the number one of all time, especially so quickly after their administration. But we went into bizarro world. Like, everything that America has stood for was just suddenly wiped away, or at least the veil, I should say, that America stands for was just pulled away, and the ugly underbelly of our culture has, been once again released to the light, and the world is starting to realize that, wow, there they are. It's America at their best. But
yeah, that's one of the interesting phenomenons that I've seen over the last few years, is this like embiggening of bigots and racists. Like, you want to say they come out of the woodwork, but like people who I liked and tolerated the fact that they had different opinions than me, suddenly complete and utter assholes with no fear whatsoever.
I think that we need to discuss what an opinion is versus what political views are versus what moral and ethical views are, because they're all very different. I mean, a matter of opinion is liking pineapple on your pizza or not. A matter of political opinion is not wanting to fund extra programs, or, conservative policies versus more socially progressive policies. But then ethical views and moral views come down to, like, should we give this particular group their basic human rights? And if you cross into that plane where you no longer want to, associate with a certain group, or you decide that blacks are lesser human beings, or gays don't deserve rights, or, transgender individuals are, mentally ill, then I don't want to talk to you. You're not a good person. You're not a conservative. You're not a good person. There's a difference. Because we have people who are also liberals, so to speak, who also say horrible things. Look at J.K. Rowling this week, or the last couple years now. She has come out as an absolute transphobe. And this is a woman who has stood up to Donald Trump on Twitter, who we all loved and put on this pedestal as being the author of Harry Potter, and now she's completely out and about as a TERF, a trans exclusionary radical feminist. And I feel bad for having a Harry Potter tattoo on my arm now. Like, I don't want to have anything to do with this woman. Mm-hmm. And it's alarming. It's not something that is limited to just one side of the political aisle, as we're learning. And the best thing we can do with these individuals, with these specific hateful individuals, is just shove them back under the rocks from whence they came. Yeah. And this is not going to be easy. It's going to be painful. It's going to take the riots. It's going to take methods of aggressive protesting in order to make change. I mean, look what just happened in the last week. We had NASCAR ban the battle flag. How amazing is that? And that's just because the drivers were like, we're done. And NASCAR within 48 hours was like, cool, we're done. Yeah, it pissed off their fan base, but I was just like, golf clap, because that quick they were able to take care of it. Meanwhile, the NFL still is waffling over Colin Kaepernick kneeling. So I'm just like, come on. We have the ability to make this change. You just have to be willing to do it. And if you're unwilling to do it, centrism isn't always the right answer.
Yeah. Yeah, a change in hearts and minds. I've always thought that is a challenge that we're not up to as a race, as a race of creatures, humans.
Yeah. Well, humans, a lot of my friends joke, and this is actually quite cruel sounding, but, we are still primates. We do still operate on, the primary level of hierarchy and things like that. And even though we want to move past that, a vast majority of us are trying to, evolve and become bipeds, so to speak, as some of my more aggressive friends will put it. In the end, we're still just, we're still just animals like other animals on this planet, and we're still facing these struggles. Of course, I'm not an anthropologist. I've taken anthropology classes, so I'm going to leave that stuff for them. I am a historian, and we don't always see eye to eye, unfortunately. It's just something that we've had to, our fields overlap a lot, but we are still we still have our wings of our Venn diagrams. But
sure. Well, one of the things that I've noticed too, and I thought was, I don't want to say interesting, troubling about our recent history, is this this approach that facts are not absolute. I've argued with people, and I'm not going to lump them on one side of the debate, because they're on both sides of the aisle. It just, like, you tell them a fact and they're like, nope, I'm not buying it.
Well, I mean, there is the old phrase that, facts have a liberal bias, but in some cases, facts are facts. They're not necessarily going to be good or bad. The study of history is much like the study of any science, be it a natural science or a social science. There is no good or bad. It just is what it is. And you have to look at it from all angles and create your conclusion from that. And as far as something like a fact goes, oh my God, like propaganda is something that I've been working on since like my first year in graduate school. And I was working on propaganda going back as early as the Protestant Reformation with the advent of the printing press, and just how easily images can sway a mind, which is why I think that like a lot of the memes I find very like, a little too a little too daunting sometimes. And I had someone, a family friend, and she's actually a really wonderful, sweet woman, and she shared what was clearly a propaganda piece, and it was a bit more on the it was on the leftist side and not the right side. I tend to I find leftist propaganda is written more in a way that sounds more intelligent but isn't necessarily correct, whereas right-wing propaganda tends to have that underbelly of absolute hatred and disdain and othering. And that goes into the types of memories that people have, and that's a cool subject I can get on in a second. But I called her out, like, this is propaganda. I have fact checked this. This is incorrect. You really shouldn't be sharing this information because it's false. And then she's like, but what, but if I agree with it, is it still false? And I'm like, yes, just because you agree with something doesn't mean that that's right. I'm like, you are literally sharing propaganda. Like, this is how it works. Someone sees something that they agree with, whether it's right or wrong, and they're just going to share it and believe it and have other people believe in it. And that's how, these horrible ideals gain traction. During the Protestant Reformation with the printing press, you saw it on both sides. You had pro-Catholic, pro-Protestant, anti-Catholic. It was just, absolutely horrific. I mean, I was reading things that I was like, whew, stuff that you wouldn't consider coming out of, the 16th century. They were that vicious. And it just continually gets worse. The Enlightenment tried to fight it a little bit, but the Enlightenment also had its own issues where you had these early origins of historical research and anthropological research. And this is where a lot of those ideas of, whites being superior to blacks and Asians were coming out of, or, was the Enlightenment. And then you had this another kind of a reformation. It was like an evangelical revolution in the early Victorian age, and that's where a lot of this anti-intellectual stuff comes from, and we're still dealing with that today, especially here in the United States from the evangelical community. Like I've mentioned on my page, I was raised Roman Catholic in a Greek Orthodox area. I am hardcore big church. Like, I don't practice anymore. I'm much more of an atheist now, but having that experience from, a liturgical background, especially, a big Chalcedon liturgical background, and then meeting people who are evangelicals and the way that they speak and the way that they think and the way they interpret the Bible, I'm just like, whoa, 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 whoa. I went to Catholic school for 2 years, and this is like well above and beyond like anything I have ever heard. And they tend to put too much stock into scripture, which is also extremely dangerous from all avenues. I mean, that's not just Christianity, of course. I mean, I have issues with pagans doing it as well, where pagans will latch onto anti-intellectual, anti-liturgical, evangelical propaganda and then spread that as their own. And, that's something else I have to kind of be like, this is still fake. And again, but if I believe in it, why can't I share it? And I'm just like, it just
but
over
it's
and
saying
over.
what you think. Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I don't know, having the COVID-19 pandemic and this the whole race conversation coming out at the same time. I mean, I kind of feel like we're probably at that point because of we've all been in isolation for 3 months. And we've just been festering, but seeing the same sort of disinformation campaign with COVID, supposed experts with a couple of letters after their name, and then people are like, "Yeah, I don't want to wear a mask. I'm sharing this. This is the truth." And next thing you know, people are dying.
That's oh wow. But it's like my dad and I were discussing the other day. He's like, he was like, it's like it's 1968 all over again. We have a pandemic. We have a president who who's out of his mind. We have, severe civil rights issues. He's like, the only thing we need now is Woodstock and a war, and we're good to go. And I'm just like, well, we're not going to have Woodstock this year because COVID-19 is obviously far worse than the Asian flu, or it was called the Hong Kong flu. Horribly incorrect, but much like the Spanish flu, that's just how they labeled things for a long time. And we're trying to tell people, no, don't call this the Chinese flu, don't call this the Wuhan flu, because one, it's not a flu, it's a coronavirus, so it's actually more closely related to the common cold, only it's a common cold from hell. And don't refer to it. We're trying to be better than we were in the 1960s, and we're not doing a very good job. And I had someone share things like, we had 100,000 people die from the Hong Kong flu and nobody cared then, and we all still went to Woodstock. And I'm like, that was 100,000 people over the course of 2 years. We just lost 100,000 people in the course of 3 months.
Yeah, good God, yeah.
I'm like, in 2 years, the rate we're going to have millions dead. But they see it as what has been pushed. But if 2% of the population is perfectly fine, as long as we can get the economy going, as long as I can get my damn nails done, I don't care if grandma dies. But it's not just grandma dying. I have to fly next week, and I have to admit I'm pretty nervous, but I need to get out. Like, I have to go, I have to go see Bitchy Bestie and help him out with some things, and, spend some time away from the mister, because he's driving me batshit insane. But, no, it's just I don't understand, why people are thinking, like, we had that lung transplant this week, a double lung transplant. She was only 20, and I didn't see much on comorbidities, but it doesn't seem to be like discriminating a whole lot. Younger people are getting far different, while the mortality rate may be higher for the older demographic. The younger individuals are not getting out of this unscathed. And while I have already had a couple of friends who have had it, they did fine. For them, it was like a bad cold, and they were able to get over it without any damage that they know of. I have another friend who went through it, where she said it was like the worst flu of her life, had the COVID toes. She was watching her blood ox levels. It was a little scary. She did okay. I also had an aunt who is dead. She died 2 weeks ago. She got it from her daughter, who was completely asymptomatic, a little sniffle. She thought it was allergies because they aren't testing.
Yeah.
Because those people with the little sniffle, like I know this is allergies because I haven't left the house. I mean, it might not be, but she didn't have a fever. She had a little sniffle. Turns out it was COVID. It gave her mom COVID, put her on a ventilator. 10 days later, they unplugged her. Just like that. It's not discriminating against anybody, and I think that's a bit more frightening overall. And the fact that more people are willing to go and scream at our politicians to open things up with guns, which is abhorrent in my opinion. I'm a gun owner, and it's just mind-boggling to me. But it also places white privilege is at its finest this month, between the Reopen rallies and the Black Lives Matters rallies, and how they're each being received by the media and by law enforcement in this nation. It really is painting a really bad picture that proves, like one of my undergrad professors said, that the Confederacy did in fact win.
They just it's true. Like, I mean, so we're up in Massachusetts, where I don't know, maybe a year ago I would have told you we're a little saner, but that's not the case.
No.
We're more closeted, if anything. But that was one of the things. So the state just came out with guidelines for reopening the schools in the fall, and they're talking about like 10 kids to a classroom, half day, staggered schedules, masks. And I've seen more people say, like, COVID doesn't affect the kids, they'll be fine. And I'm like, you apparently, despite what's been going on the last 3 months, have learned nothing about how a fucking virus works.
No. And it cracks me up too, because you always see these memes, again, speaking in pictograph. Another day went by, I didn't use algebra once. Or there's the one about biology class, like, what did you learn in high school? Well, first of all, the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. And I'm like, listen, first of all, Red blood cells don't have mitochondria. So that doesn't work in that regards. 2, you took these classes in high school for a reason. They weren't time wasters. And I think that we're starting to see this now. You have all of these adults, I mean, people my age who I was in school with are posting these things. Like, I never learned about how Congress worked. Why didn't they teach us this in school? Like, you literally were sitting next to me in that class. They are teaching you, you're not listening. Yeah. And that is like one of my big things, is that it's not that things aren't being taught. Classes are too big. Teachers are overworked. Parents are overworked. They're unable to stay at home and help their children because wages are incredibly low. And students aren't paying attention because they're so distracted by technology, by too many students in the room, by it being a nice day. I mean, I used to zone out and look outside like, oh, look at the palm trees, look like dinosaurs, you know? I mean, little things like that. Children will zone out. But we need to put more weight on, these classes do matter. They're not going to make you subject matter experts, but they're going to provide a baseline of knowledge for you to be able to take it to the next level. So while I am a historian, I'm not a scientist, I can read an article on COVID and then find the source and then continue reading. It's not that difficult. Yeah. I mean, and you don't have to be a historian or a scientist to read a study. Most of them are posted for free. You can go on academia.edu, Google Scholar, Project Muse. There's like wonderful databases. I actually think JSTOR is still offering like a free service right now for people who want to do research and pull some of their books and articles off for free. So again, it goes back to like some of my earlier arguments. We have all this knowledge at our fingertips, but people don't want to take that extra step. They want to be spoon-fed stuff. Yeah. And rather than doing the work, they would rather just make assumptions or see a picture and it's not on the internet if it isn't true. And that is definitely, the angle that I really have pushed the most with my page. And going back to what I mentioned earlier about the concept of memory also does not help in this regard, because we have this theory of historical memory being only about 80 years old, 75 to 80 years old. Look at what happened 75 to 80 years old. We're losing those individuals. I have been incredibly lucky that I had World War II vets as coworkers. And so I've been able to sit with these gentlemen and get their sides of the story. I've sat with men who were prisoners of war from the Japanese, and they will tell you the most horrific stories with a smile, but we're not going to have them in a few more years. They might not survive this pandemic. And, I consider myself greatly fortunate that I've had these experiences. Not everybody does, but it's been a little overwhelming, seeing this concept of historical memory play out again. And how people will use something that's more recent as like a platform to perpetuate something different, but it doesn't necessarily work that way. And I mean, I still have people like, thinking that Reagan was the greatest thing since sliced bread, but now, we're well into like 40 years after his administration, just about. And so historians are starting to chip at it, and they're starting to find some not nice things. Same thing with Carter. Carter was not the best president of his time. Amazing human being. I have nothing but excellent things to say about President Carter, and I'm terrified for him right now because he's absolutely at that age. But we're starting to read more about his administration and what else he did, and now we're starting to find better things about him. But we've just recently really completed our studies of World War II and the Eisenhower administration. But people are too focused on the here and now or what happened within the last decade that they aren't paying attention. And this is where things get dangerous. People were so upset over the Obama presidency. Look what happened. And they're still screaming about Hillary's emails. I don't know why, but
it doesn't.
And so the concept of memory and how it plays into historical study has been something that I've been reading up on a little bit right now, and it's super cool on the different types of memory and everything like that. And there is a massive online course on it also through, I think it was Leeds, the University of Leeds in the UK, through a platform called FutureLearn, called How We Remember War or something along those lines, War and Violence. totally worth taking when it comes back around. And it's free, or you can, you know, apply for their certificate and get it for, it was like $40, but totally worth doing. It was only a few weeks long, and I learned so much on the studies that are being done regarding human memory in history, especially aggressive history such as war and violence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just seeing, so there's, you know, statues are under attack right now.
Okay.
So Aaron and I are both very involved in scouts. And so I've been seeing in my feed, people are freaking out because there's a statue of Baden-Powell that is, well, if you actually read the articles, the reason they're taking it down is to protect it, because there's been some threats against it. Baden-Powell, wonderful guy, started the scouting movement, also at the same time, a complete piece of shit. And I don't know. It's like, how do you reconcile people who have done good and should be commemorated for the great things they started versus the, you know, maybe they're trying to compensate or overcome for their shittiness?
So the concept of statues is kind of weird. I've done work with iconoclasm before. I find the concept very fascinating, and that's basically what's going on, is a form of iconoclasm, and where, you know, images are being destroyed for a cause. You know, it happened during, Islam is an iconoclastic religion. It happened during the Byzantine Empire twice. It happened during the Soviet Union. So you see this stuff come around, and it's not necessarily an issue of good versus bad, but I think that in this case, it's a combination of what would be considered both antagonistic memory and cosmopolitan memory. So antagonistic memory is, I apologize, I'm drinking an IPA, guys, so it's really bubbly. But antagonistic memory is what you see mostly on the right wing, where, you know, you have this memory of war, but you're pulling like a heritage out of it, especially with, the Civil War. And you're using that war as a source of patriotism, of aggressive patriotism, even at the cost of minorities or people of color or something along those lines. And the flag, that there it is. You know, you can't kneel before the flag because you're dishonoring the vets who fought in this war. That's like the best way I can really describe antagonistic memory. And then you have cosmopolitan memory, which is like where social justice warriors come from. And while their intent may be good, they might be doing more harm in the long run, because they're not afraid to rewrite history books if it makes things look better for the human race. And that in themselves is also incredibly dangerous. As far as the statues coming down, I'm actually okay with most of the Civil War statues, unless they're at a battlefield or something. Those are a little different because they're put up by the park, the park rangers, or they are actual grave sites. But most of them were put up by the Daughters of the Confederacy. They're made out of zinc. They were mass produced in Connecticut. They were bought very cheaply, altered to have Confederate stuff put on them, and then placed around the nation. I'm talking even in California, even in Washington State, for like random people, or always Stonewall Jackson and Robert E. Lee. And it's just bizarre that they did this, but the reason was Jim Crow predominantly. They did it to push back, to actually subjugate Blacks. And then again, during the 50s and the 60s, during the Civil Rights Movement, when you put somebody on a pedestal that's above eye level, they're no longer a person, they're a god. You are venerating them. And that's something that you need to keep in mind. So if you take somebody who was a general from the Civil War, Nathan Bedford Forrest, probably the biggest douche I could think of right now, and you put him on a 10-foot pedestal, and then higher than that, your eyes are drawn up toward him. Human nature automatically says that you're venerating him, or he's looking down on you and you're ashamed. You are in his shadow. And that is a huge problem. And, at first I was super against it. And this is an example of my mind changing. So, as a historian, especially when it deals with material culture, I was super against it. But I listened to other people rather than getting offended, or rather than, screaming and hollering and telling people that they're wrong. I listened to people. I'm like, okay, tell me about these statues. How do you feel about them? What can I do to help as a historian? And they didn't yell and scream at me because I was willing to listen to them. And they're like, this is how I feel. And then, I cross-reference that with, hey, we're making these men out of, we're turning these jerks into gods. We're not destroying history. History is written down. If you're looking at a statue for your history, I need to go and slap your mama for not teaching you how to read. Like, come on, like there's other issues here regarding all of that. As far as Columbus goes, I have mixed feelings about him because yes, he is important. He opened up transatlantic trade. All of us white people wouldn't be here without him, which is a terrible thought, a whole other can of worms, really, when you get into colonialism. But on the other hand, he was a super jerk. He was a jerk for his time period. Even when you have his own son and brother writing in their journals about how horrific he was to the natives and how unchristian he was being, that's something we need to take into account as well. Columbus Day in this nation has a very interesting history because it was more upheld by the Italian American community versus the actual, Americans. Like, I think that for the most part, at this point, all of us know that he was not a good person, that we really shouldn't be doing this. But, him being Italian rather than Spanish, having this legacy, so to speak, gave the Italians, who were, as I have previously mentioned, quite, I don't want to say persecuted, it's an incredibly harsh word, but, prejudiced against, it kind of gave them a rallying point. And creating the holiday kind of gave Italian Americans a little bit more purpose at a time when they were being treated like absolute garbage. And that's something to remember as well, especially with the older individuals, the older Italians, because they see it as a direct attack on their culture and what they had to deal with in order to get to what they are today. And so that's where the new type of memory comes in, and that's called agonistic. So it's the opposite of antagonistic. Agonistic memory takes into account the whole story. You have, yes, so Columbus was a douchebag on one hand. On the other hand, yeah, okay, he opened up transatlantic trade. He did start, a whole new era of history for the world as we know it. No, he didn't discover anything. You have the Italian Americans who look at him, from a completely different point of view than the Native Americans obviously do. Then you take into account the country of Spain, who absolutely adores him and absolutely venerates him. And it's just totally bizarre when you go to Spain or see like a Spanish monument on just how much they love the guy, and they teach the history like he was pristine. And it's just like, ooh, even coming from growing up with the whole rhyme, about the boats and 1492, seeing how they write about him is kind of alarming to me. So we also have outside forces as well that are going to be very critical about how we start determining how to treat Columbus in the United States. And I do think it's time, it shouldn't be a holiday. I think that we should teach Columbus did open this period in exploration. He was not the discoverer of America. Continents can't really be discovered. He was certainly not the first Europeans in the Western Hemisphere at all. And so you should teach it warts and all. Yeah, Columbus was this guy. He did this stuff. He's important because of this, but we really don't like him anymore because we've learned better. And that's the whole thing, is just, we're going to teach him, but we have to teach you what else we have learned. You just can't make your history stagnant. It changes every day. I look back on my master's thesis now and I'm like, well, that was wrong. My mind is changing every day. My mind over the statues has changed. And, especially growing up in the South, even though I've never been a huge fan of the Confederacy, I'll be straight up, even though I grew up down here, we were always taught the Union won fair and square, even though Tallahassee was the only capital not to be taken by the Union. Floridians were always taught that the Union won. There was no war of Northern aggression. We would make fun of people like that. When you see someone flying a Confederate flag, that was usually a sign of, yeah, that guy, not your friend. So it's, but that's my variety of experience. It's not necessarily somebody else's. But what we need to do is going back to building that more comprehensive view and just consolidating it and teaching it better and dispelling the myths, but not erasing it, because erasure is just as dangerous as teaching it incorrectly, in my opinion. And so while, yes, these statues should come down, yes, we should commemorate Columbus Day or re-commemorate Columbus Day as Indigenous Peoples Day. I think we absolutely should learn more about our Native American cultures here. We still can't forget why we took the statues down. We need to be teaching why this is happening, why iconoclasm happens, why Columbus was a bad person, even for his time in the 15th century, why, he said these things that he did, why they were coming over to America correctly, not just to find a new world or because the world was flat, which was fake. Flat earthers, of course, are their own special their own special thing, I'm not gonna lie. But yeah, if we can start consolidating things and just work with the Board of Education, screw her, but and just getting through to people and facilitating change, it's not gonna happen overnight. It's got to be done smoothly, it's got to be done in a compassionate manner, and violence is going to happen. I'm not going to lie, I'm pretty pro violence, because nothing has ever changed in this world without explosions. That's like, my point of view. Well, yeah, but so yeah, that was kind of soapboxy and kind of venty, but I think that kind of makes the point. And I'm looking forward to reading more about agonistic memory and what the Unrest project is doing in Europe. That's Unrest is UNREST, all capitals, project in Europe. I think it's EU, but the UK is still involved. And it's fascinating what they're doing over there from a European perspective, where they don't have statues of the bad guys still up, or at least who we would consider the bad guys.
Uniquely American.
It is very uniquely American, at least as far as the Civil War goes. I mean, there are some sketchy people over there that definitely could be like taking down the statue of King Leopold II. Yes, that guy was pure evil. Like when American slave owners thought this guy was pure evil, that should tell you how bad he really was. And so having Belgium remove his statues, yeah, good riddance. If you need any sources on that, I recommend reading King Leopold's Ghost. It will give you nightmares. It will make you cry. But that's a good way of teaching history. It's, like my undergraduate advisor told us when we were working on our capstone. She went to someone, he was like, he didn't do well on an assignment. And she's like, well, what do you think you're doing here? Why did you major in this? And he's like, well, I thought it would be easy. And she looks at him, and she had this heavy French accent, and she looks at him and she goes, history is not easy. It is very hard. It is triggering. It is alarming. It is upsetting. And if you don't like it, go major in something else like communications. And I will always remember that. She's like, yeah. So that was kind of, and I've never actually seen a student. I had one student once, while I was an adjunct, that gave me a little bit of a hard time. But for the most part, I've never had to like issue any kind of trigger warning or anything. I think that most people going into to study history know it's going to be, especially on a collegiate level, know that it's going to be pretty rough. It is tough because, yeah, speaking as someone who does have mental illness and does have some trauma, I understand and empathize with content warnings, but at the same time, some things you absolutely have to rip the Band-Aid off of, and I think that history is one of them.
Yeah. Well, and if you don't, like that's that danger of repeating. You think things weren't as bad as they were.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny thinking about the when you mentioned the Daughters of the Confederacy. I remember it wasn't recently; it was a few years ago when they first started taking down Civil War statues. Mm-hmm. There's a plaque on George's Island up here in Boston commemorating the Confederate soldiers that were held prisoner on the island and died. And they took that down. And I remember, like, I know some Civil War reenactors, and they were very upset at the erasing of history. But doing a little digging, that plaque had been placed by the Daughters of the Confederacy. So they were getting rid of it and putting a new plaque with the, honoring the people that died there and taking away this sign of hatred that had been placed there to intimidate people.
Yeah. Mr. Bitchy and I, when we first started dating, we were driving home from visiting my parents in Florida. This is when I still lived in New England, when I was in Rhode Island. And we stopped at Manassas Battlefield, and it was so cold. It was the middle of, it was early January, like right after the new year. And I went to the battlefield, and I actually have a picture of me standing next to the statue of Stonewall Jackson. And it's not because I was into Stonewall Jackson or anything like that, but because I wanted his view. And this is where he got the nickname Stonewall, was there. He was standing like a stone wall, was overlooking this battlefield. And I kind of wanted to get in that mood. So on one hand, markers like that are also so important because they make things more immersive. And I love like immersive and interpretive history along those lines. I think that the more we learn about how individuals learn, things like that are super important. I'm a visual learner, so things like statues placed in a very specific location where this one thing happened and you have a specific overlook, super important to how I learn. There's also more tactile things, QR codes. Museums are doing incredible more interactive things, and I think things like that are important. But like I mentioned, national parks and battlefields kind of exempt from the whole like Daughters of the Confederacy crap. I also went to the Confederate Cemetery at Manassas, and that's a mass grave. Like there are actual soldiers there. And yeah, it was the Confederate. These were not our friends, they were traitors. And but you get kind of a sense of just how many men were there from just the Confederacy, and every state was marked, where each of their mass graves was. And that was just kind of chilling to me. It was absolutely chilling. And the Union Cemetery, I think, was also kind of similar. And I'm just like, ooh, yeah, that really puts things in perspective of just how many men died for a lost cause. Of course, the Confederacy is still worth studying. I'm knocking my table around. I'm sorry. I have someone who actually focuses on it, and he's not a lost cause, or he's a historian. There's a difference. And, getting into the heads of these men, like the average men who fought had no idea what was going on. The women, I wrote a paper on Confederate women, or at least Southern women, not necessarily Confederate. They had no idea. They had no idea why they were going to war. The men didn't tell them. And these were rich women who were fully literate, living on plantations with their slaves. They had no idea why their men were going to war, why the country had split, why things were going on. These were all women who were supposed to get married or were just married. Some of them were pregnant. Some of them, would never be married because their betrothed had gone to war. But they were left in the dark as to what was going on. And it was just so upsetting to read their epistolaries, their letters. Like, I'm actually getting choked up again thinking about it, because I'm just like, I couldn't imagine now, like, my husband just taking off and saying, I'm going to war. I have to go fight, and not telling me why, not telling me where. Mm-hmm. And that just tells you, like, how little people really knew what was going on. And even in the North, of course, not to be absolved, but they had a little bit more because they had the newspapers, they had the printing presses, they had the population to get this information out. So they were a bit more informed in the long run. But like reading, like, like these letters from family members in the South, I was just like, I couldn't possibly even, like, I mean, I'm getting the vapors, like I'm Scarlett O'Hara straight up, just like, wow, that is a tough read. And so that's things you have to take into account too. And that's all fine to read about. It's important to learn these experiences from both the North and the South. It's not okay to like take these women's letters, put them up like, oh, these poor women, look at how bad they suffered because of them Union boys. No. That's that's the wrong thing. That's, again, antagonistic history. But I think that if we shared more of that personal communications from both sides of the war, people would be less apt to consider doing it again. People die. Women were left widows. Women were, they were living together. Like a bunch of women would actually live in houses together, and they ended up becoming lesbians because they needed to experience love and everything like that. And that was considered terrible. Of course, you're talking, the 1860s. So they were being killed or whipped for that. And it was just absolutely alarming. And I think that, again, we need to bring this stuff more to light, not necessarily just on the collegiate level where I was able to read it, but maybe more in high school, like, hey, let's talk about how people reacted to these wars. And we have more information now as far as the modern wars, definitely World War II and Vietnam, where we have that more of like, an emotional memory, where we don't necessarily pay attention to that as much with the Civil War. And I think that would also make a huge difference.
Yeah, God, when I hear people talking about let's have another Civil War, like, what? But it's that human cost. Nobody really, they think of it in grand terms.
Yeah. The South will rise again. No, it ain't. It ain't going nowhere.
I don't know that it ever laid down.
But yeah, I do think that if we did teach, human expense more, people would be less apt to be more gung-ho toward war. And this is something, again, going into what the Unrest Project is working on with the approach of agonistic memory. And the World War II Museum, the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, if you get a chance to go, I love it. Yeah, of course, it's very pro-USA, but they nail agonistic memory, because you walk through and they beautiful displays, beautiful interactive exhibits, and like you go on this fake train and you're given like a dog tag of an actual American soldier. Like mine was actually an Italian immigrant, which I thought was hilarious. But and you can go through and listen to their story at different points in the museum at the audio output. But at one point in time, you didn't realize it. So you're getting into like, America starting to enter the war, yada, yada, yada. You turn the corner and you're in a Japanese internment camp. Like, this happened. We're not erasing this from you. You're going to pay attention to this. And all of a sudden, like people were in there. I mean, I knew this. I actually learned it in high school. My parents never learned about the Japanese internment camps. We have George Takei now, who's been very vocal about his experience, even though he was a child. That is super important. So when you walk through these wonderful exhibits at the World War II Museum and you come into the room about the Japanese internment camps, it's like, holy shit. Like, this happened. This is not something that's made up. This happened. Like, we had women in there who were in front of my husband and I, and they're like, we had no idea. Like, she was bawling. She's like, I had no idea this was a thing. They invoked that emotional response. She will never forget that. She will always remember going into that room and learning about Japanese internment camps the hard way.
Wow.
And they did it with the concentration camps too. They saved it till the end. You knew it was coming. You knew it was in there, but they saved it to when the Americans actually walked in and liberated the camps. And you're building up because eventually they're going to have to cover it. And I wasn't ready. My husband wasn't ready. Nobody in that room was ready because they pulled absolutely no punches. And I was just like nauseated. I was crying and I'm like, good. You know what? This is exactly what we need to see. And
yeah, you need that.
And people are like, oh, it's a shock factor. We shouldn't traumatize people like this. And I'm like, if you're going to a museum about war, especially World War II, you're going to be, you're going to be subjected to stuff about prisoners of war and the concentration camps. The Japanese were horrific to us. We were horrific to the Japanese. We were not innocents in any of that when it came to the POWs, and I'm glad that was something that was covered. I'm glad that it went into how Americans treated, foreigners, foreign nationals in this country, because it was not good. Mm-hmm. Look at the way that we treated Muslims after 9/11. Yeah, it was horrific.
And thank God it didn't happen. But I think that probably most of America would have been okay with rounding them up and putting them in a camp.
I don't think most of America would have, no, but we also live in, again, this is one benefit to the internet, is that we can get information out faster. And yeah, that was 2001. I mean, I didn't have dial-up, but I had like Roadrunner. It wasn't the best internet. We didn't have the same social media, but we did have America Online. We had LiveJournal. The news was getting out there, and it was getting out there faster than it was in the 1940s, and definitely faster than things were in the 1860s. And I think that's something that's saving us a lot now. We are paying more attention to politics on a global scale than we never have before in our lives. So we can watch something go down and just know, hey, this is not good. And having all of those eyes on you definitely makes you rethink how, your actions. And that's something as I look into more and more about potentially doing a state house and then a congressional run for myself, paying attention to how all of this stuff is perceived online. Of course, my pages will have to go, especially, both my there's a reason why I have a work Facebook page, and then I have a personal Facebook page, and then the Bitchy Historian. But yeah, but if I am able to pull that off, Mr. Bitchy's not too keen on the idea of me running for office. But the more I read about it and the work that I'm going to have to put into it, I think I can do it. It's going to have to wait until after he retires in a few years. Yeah, but Bitchy Bestie has already offered to do my PR and help me build stuff. So it's something I'm kind of playing around with right now. Maybe that's what we need in Congress is like, instead of a lawyer, we need a historian.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if anything that we've learned over the last few years is we need more intelligent people, because otherwise this is where we are. Which, and it's funny, I am circling back for a second, thinking about celebrating people in history rather than venerating them. I could be totally off base here, but it seems to me that in our culture, we have no problem doing that with our comic book heroes or our movie heroes. You look at, like, I'll pick on Marvel, the darker, grittier universe, or Superman, I know he's DC, killing somebody. You're complicating these heroic characters, but then when we turn to our actual history, people are afraid to do that.
Comic books are interesting, and this is something I'm going to be addressing later on in the year. I have been contracted to write for an upcoming website. I'm going to be doing an article series, and where I am going to be touching on the comic books. But I think like what we just had within the last few years too, in the Marvel actual comic universe, not so much the cinematic universe. Anybody who follows Marvel knows that it's like a slew of universes. It's the multiverse. But when we had Captain America basically become Hydra, I was like, oh, honey, no. Like, you just don't do that. Like, anybody who reads Marvel's like, oh, what a douchebag. And he is. I forget what is his name? But yeah, he is a problematic artist. And but seeing Marvel kind of take that turn was just like, that was a bit much for me. Another one that drives me crazy, of course, is the Punisher. Yeah. And like when you see cops with the Punisher skulls on their car, and I'm like, no, you're missing the whole point of Frank Castle. You're kind of like, and I'm glad that they addressed that in the comic book as well. Mm-hmm. He's like, I'm not on your side. You should not look up to me as being something good. And he's like, his angle toward law enforcement and everything like that. And so that I'm just like, wow, come on, people. Maybe I should write more about comic books and comic history and things like that. I think that would be super cool. I think that it's something that, at least from an American standpoint, people would really enjoy. I know that there are, another thing on Marvel that they've done too, Alpha Flight had the first openly gay characters, I believe, as far as early as the 1970s, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so Marvel has always been kind of at like the forefront of like, really pushing those awesome boundaries. And so when they took those back steps with Captain America, I was just like, you scumbag. Anybody who knows Marvel knows they shouldn't do that. Like Jack Kirby's like rolling in his grave. We're gonna have zombie Jack Kirby get up and just come back and just like punch you. Just end this right now.
We're stopping this.
Yeah. Which is why in Endgame, when Chris Evans as Captain America said "Hail Hydra," at that one point in time. I hope everybody has seen this by now. If I haven't, I'm not spoiling a whole lot. But when he said that at that particular part, my entire theater just like erupted because they knew it was just like that was that was the MCU, the cinematic universe, literally slapping the comic timeline for what they did. So I used to read a lot more comics. I'm actually super behind now. So thankfully, I can catch up with like, fan wikis and things like that. And people can fill me in on what it is. Cause there's just so much going on. And every time I try to get into a new arc of like X-Men or something, I get distracted and then it's all over. And I'm like, oh no, I missed it.
I thought I would have utilized more of this pandemic time to catch up on stuff, but I honestly, I haven't. I've found other ways to distract myself.
I have sat on my butt a lot during the pandemic. I have watched my weight. I've actually been going on frequent walks and been good for the most part. I have gotten some research done. After my conferences got canceled, I did get really depressed, and that was something that I had to overcome. I do go to therapy on a regular basis, and I do I do make this known on my page as well that I am, currently struggling with mental illness, both anxiety and depression. And that was something that I had to, completely overcome was, yeah, my life just got wrecked for the summer, but I'm not alone. And so, I had to make new plans. And yeah, well, on, a week from Tuesday, I should be flying to London. I've been able to kind of, change things up a little bit, and now I'm going to be going to go visit the best friend for a week and help him out with some projects around his house, just as a change of scenery. And he hasn't gone anywhere. Like, I mean, I know I'm at risk flying, but my dad flies for work every day. Well, not every day, but quite frequently. So I'm getting into this. I'm going to try to stay as safe as possible and just, I got to get out.
Yeah.
I gotta get out. I need the change of scenery. I need new projects. And yeah, I do need to get back to the research that I needed to work on for the conferences, but turning my brain off for a couple months has not been the worst thing ever.
Yeah, it's good. I think people need that. I got to give a shout out. I saw Lori's here. So hi, Lori.
Hi, Lori.
So, all right. So Aaron's having experience. He's been quiet. He's been experiencing some serious CPU issues on his end. So,
it's a nightmare over here. That's why I've been so quiet. So,
let me ask you this: what can we do to navigate our way through all the yelling and screaming right now, and try to, I don't know, try to make informed decisions? Any advice?
I know it's super frustrating. Every day I feel like I'm walking into a war zone. It's like I wake up, I'm Picard, I have my tea, damage report. But I think that going back to that concept of agonistic memory, we need to find the facts. We need to be compassionate to the other views. And by other views, I'm not saying Nazis, because we only punch Nazis. There is no negotiating with somebody who is already crossing that line into ethical and moral, decisions that are not good. But if it is someone who's just like, oh, the statues are ruining our history, bring up, the Daughters of the Confederacy. Bring up some of the things that I just said about, what women really had to deal with during the Civil War in the South. Bring up, Jim Crow, the civil rights movement, why those statues actually exist. And always remind them that you don't get history from statues, for one. Arm yourself with knowledge, and not just Wikipedia. Though Wikipedia is a good place to start, you can always scroll down to the bottom of the article and find the good stuff, find the meat and potatoes of what they cite, read through it, find those sources. Primary sources, stuff that's actually been said by someone who lived through the historical event, are golden. They're impossible to argue against. Although I have had someone try, I find myself quoting Mussolini's On Fascism probably more than I really, really want to. but it's super funny when you have someone spouting stuff about fascism, and I'm like, so this is right from the horse's mouth. Like, this is he wrote this. If you want to argue with Mussolini, I can show you where he was hung upside down. Here's a picture of that, by the way. That's a good one. And remind them, like, what you're saying is wrong. And if you ever have a question, shoot us a message at the Bitchy Historian. Either myself or Mini Bitchy will get to you. And if we do get difficult things, we do try to research questions and find good answers. I do have people frequently like, I know this isn't right, but I'm not finding a source. And we'll be like, give us a few minutes, we'll see what we can find. And we do try to help the best that we can in that regard. And obviously it's a labor of love. We don't get paid for it. I have a Patreon. It's available on my page. If you go to shop now, you should be able to get right to it. And I have nothing available on the Patreon at this point, but I will hopefully, that's another pandemic project that I've been sitting on, be doing a podcast soon. And so I'll be building a website and doing a podcast. Not a live one, but like a weekly, reading kind of thing about, events in history. I'm going to start with 12 medieval bitches. I'm going to start talking about women in the Middle Ages. And I'm going to try to start there because that's sort of where I focus. And I would like to address civil rights issues, especially from a medieval point of view. People of color, things like that, and really help push back these myths, especially in regards to things like white supremacy, the issues that the medieval community is dealing with right now in regards to that. And those subtle little pushes. And of course, most importantly, we all really need to vote this November. You need to get out and you need to vote. And there is no protest voting this year. You're gonna have to suck it up, buttercup. If you want change, you're gonna have to hold your nose and vote for the other guy. It's what I have to do. I also have a primary coming up this August for down ticket here in Florida. Please vote for your down ticket candidates. If you don't like how your congressperson is doing, you need to vote them out. Term limits are in the hands of the voters. The whole discussion of them is a placebo. It's not a panacea. Our system is in place for a reason. A weak legislative branch full of rookies gives the executive branch too much power. We need to return the power to the people, take back Congress, and then from there we can start pushing, get these people back under rocks or make those advances in education that we need to do and change the way that people think. You have to vote down ticket. And educate yourself. Just do some reading. If you just need like a book recommendation, hit us up. I'll occasionally throw a thread out. What are you reading right now? And people will be like, "Oh, I'm reading this. And then we'll they'll get into a discussion on what this is about and things like that. So that's always kind of like a good thing to check in on what people are reading, or if they have a specific historical book recommendation. And my page is not limited to any specific time period in history. Of course, I'm a classicist, medievalist, Byzantinist, so I'm pretty early, but the method is still the method. And my course load in school does not designate my practice. So most of my work has actually, within the last 5 years or so, has been mostly modern history, especially modern military history. So I do have like a small arsenal of more current events, or as my fellow medieval friends call journalism, on modern 20th century history that I can absolutely fire off to someone if they need to do a little bit more reading on issues with fascism, anti-fascism, unfascism, or non-fascism was another thing as well. And just fight. It sucks. It's stressful. If it's clear that they're going to be combative, don't feed the troll either. And this is something that I've had to learn. Don't troll in the dungeon. Don't feed the trolls, because they're not there to learn anything. They're just there to make you mad, and they're going to sea lion, and they're just going to make you more and more mad. So best thing to do with them is to just hit the ignore button, that fancy mute button that we have now on Facebook. It mutes the person for 30 days and you're just like, bye. It doesn't stop them from posting other stuff, but it'll stop you from seeing their their posts.
You don't
And
need to consume that.
no, yeah. If they are super problematic, of course, just unfriend the bastards. And I also recommend, I'm not a huge fan of Reddit, but sometimes some good stuff comes up there. Try to use social media to your advantage. So you have Facebook, you have Twitter. Twitter, of course, is always a war zone. It's popcorn worthy. I have a Twitter account. I don't post there a whole lot, but I do have a lot of fun when I go on there. Tumblr's a shit show. Avoid it. But Reddit Ask a Historian usually can get some pretty good stuff in there, and they'd be happy to provide sources as well. And sometimes I go on there and help out as well. So you never know who you're going to see there. You never know what you'll find. And I think we lost Aaron.
Oh dear God!
We lost Aaron.
I wonder.
You are the host now.
Oh, we're still live apparently. I don't know how that happened.
Okay.
All right. Well, all right.
I guess that's that.
He was like, "Can we wrap this up? My CPU is killing me."
Oh no.
So I guess, well, we lost him, but I should wrap this up. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
This was on, and now that I've said that, I honestly don't know how to stop this.
Oh no. I don't know if I need to leave.
I guess I could just end the meeting and we'll be good. So if everybody's still listening, the Bitchy Historian on Facebook, look it up, check it out. We will, and anybody that came in late, we will have this video available on our YouTube channel and on esotericathepodcast.com. And I think on our Facebook page once it's done. It's still there. It just won't be a live event. Oh, Lori says she still sees us, and Aaron is back.
Aaron is back.
All right, Aaron, we were just trying to figure out how to wrap up because I love having Aaron as a partner because partly it's a multi-generational thing. You got a Gen Xer and you got a Gen Y or Gen Zer. But he also is a whiz with this technical stuff because I don't know what the hell I'm doing.
It's fine.
I just talk.
At least I caught up while I was watching the live stream on my phone, so I didn't miss anything.
All right, awesome. So yeah, we were just saying goodbye. Thank you again for coming on. We appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It was a blast.
That was awesome. That was our best numbers tonight so far. So.
Oh, awesome! Glad I can help. I'll definitely share everything too. We'll get you guys boosted up. So. Awesome. All right, guys. Have a great night.
You too. Take care.
Bye-bye.